translation programs here at KGIBC. Welcome to my lesson, and we're going to spend 5 minutes together today to talk a little bit about what constitutes a good translation. I think we should begin by saying, what is a translation? First of all, translation simply means that you take one language that you receive information in, which is called a source language, and reproduce that same information in another language, which is called the target language. Now, if you receive information in spoken format and reproduce that information in spoken format at the same time, it is called interpretation. Now, if your source language is written down and you reproduce that source language in a written target language, that is called translation. Whether you're doing interpretation or translation, the rules are pretty much the same. So let's look at a few rules regarding what makes you a good interpreter or translator by looking at some example sentences. I have the first example sentence, and that says, I love your shoes. Well, how do you want to translate this? If you're thinking somewhere along the lines of, 신발 정말 예쁘다. That's good, right? Now, not many people will do direct translation and say, 난 당신의 신발을 사랑합니다, which is actually a bad translation. Rule number 1, you should try to avoid direct translation unless it's absolutely necessary. Okay, so I think that may have been a little bit too easy for you. So I'm going to give you a slightly more challenging sentence that says, there was not a soul in the room. Here, room means 방, soul is 영혼. Do you have your translation? I hope nobody did. 그 방에는 영혼도 하나 없었다. That's very awkward, right? The purpose of translation is not always to do word-by-word translation, but more to deliver the main message. What are we really talking about here? We are trying to say there was no one in the room. How would you translate this more naturally in Korean? Depending on how formal or informal your text is, you could do 그 방에 사람의 흔적조차 없었다, or 그 방에 쥐새끼 한 마리가 어신거리지 않았다, which will be a lot more informal. Alright, so that brings us to rule number 2. Rule number 2 is about the tone and style of your original text. What I mean by tone and style is basically the attitude of the writer in the writing. Is he trying to be earnest, pleading, very sarcastic, or congratulatory? No matter what the tone and style is, your translation has to really show the feeling, the ambience of the writing itself. Short sentence, 잘한다. I can read it very, very bluntly and say 잘한다. Or it can be very rich in its nuance. For example, is it 잘한다, as in admiration as well as a bit of jealousy? If that's the case, your translation should actually be, wow, they're really good. However, if your tone was more like 잘한다, then your translation should be much more sarcastic and say, you've got to be kidding me.